Hello and welcome to Glasgow Doors Open Day's Digital Festival. This event will begin soon, but first we have a brief housekeeping message. So that you can get the most out of this session, we'd like to point out a few features of Zoom. By clicking on the buttons at the bottom of the Zoom window, you will be able to access the chat room, and if you are in a webinar, you will also be able to make use of the Q&A function. The Q&A function is so that you can ask specific questions of the speaker, which they will be able to answer time allowing at the end of the session. Use the chat room to contribute more generally to the discussion or to share links and resources. When using these features, please mind your P's and Q's. Both will be monitored and recorded. Most sessions will be recorded and uploaded to Glasgow Doors Open Days Festival YouTube channel and website. If you're in a meeting, please make sure you keep your microphone on mute unless otherwise directed by the host. If, for some reason, the session ends unexpectedly or you lose connection, please just click the link again and wait to be let back in. Similarly, if the host loses connection, please bear with us. We will do our best to manage any connection issues as and when they occur, and may contact you by email if necessary. Thank you so much for joining us today. We'd love to hear about your experience of our digital festival. Fill out our survey to be in with a chance of winning a prize. Our survey is available at www.glasgowdoorsopendayfestival.org.uk/survey. We hope you enjoy this event.
Hello everyone, welcome to the Secret Soviet Maps of Glasgow webinar. Thanks for joining us this evening, and thanks Glasgow Doors Open Days for hosting the webinar. My name is Thierry and I'm the Vice Chair of the New Glasgow Society. For those who are not familiar with New Glasgow Society, we are a civic society that promotes the interest about Glasgow's built environment since 1965. The membership is free, and you can join by subscribing to our mail list on our website. You can also follow us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Tonight, we are pleased to have Lex Lamb with us. If you're familiar with New Glasgow Society, you might have already heard of his name. Lex is a civic-minded designer, coder, and occasional musician whose first comic book is now being published, as well as his interest in 20th century architecture and ancient Scotland. He has had a lifelong fascination with maps. Lex joined the NGS committee in 2012, and he was the chair between 2016 and 2018. Tonight, Lex is going to present some findings about the secret map of Glasgow drawn by the Soviets during the Cold War. Informed by the work of John Davies and others, Lex will present the fascinating story and highlight some peculiar features at the secret Soviet map of Glasgow. The talk includes highlights from the first ever translation of the map's detailed text description of Glasgow's infrastructures, industry, and government in the 1970s. So now I'll just pass on to Lex. There you go.
Well, good evening, and thank you, Thierry, and thank you everybody else for choosing to Before I start, I'd like to clear up any confusion that might arise from the original title of this talk, which was Armoured Car Production at Linwood. If we get first a glimpse of the map itself and inspect that car plant as it appears there, marked as object number 45, you may be familiar with the poignant saga of the Roots car factory at Linwood, which closed in the year the map was produced, 1981. And I was surprised to learn from an early translation that its function here was given as armoured car production. Receipt of an improved later translation corrected this to armour plate production. And where the compilers of the map got the impression that armoured plate production was taking place here, I have no idea. Did the Soviets know something we locals didn't? I don't know. It would certainly be news for any Hillman Imp owners, I'm sure. But this is one of the few errors in the map that serve merely to highlight the spectacular accuracy and the quantity of detail of the rest. Although it's worth noting that Roots Group did indeed manufacture the Humber armoured car, but decades earlier and never at Linwood. Anyway, here is the map. Here is my impulse buy on eBay that started this whole journey. I have always been extremely interested in finding different lenses through which we can view our city. So when I became aware of the Latvian deposit of Soviet-era maps, of which more later, and that the sheets of their 25,000 scale plan of Glasgow were available for purchase, I needed to get hold of one. The curious appeal of the map is undeniable, especially to those unfamiliar with Cyrillic text and those raised on the Ordnance Survey. Here we see the title of the map, Glasgow, Paisley. We also see, you'll notice down there, we've got Mulgai on the left and Bardowie Loch, I think that might be Balmore, and a bit of Craigbaddy Reservoir. To see a city geography with which one is intimately well acquainted, suddenly rendered in opaque language and symbols can be disorientating. What can make it slightly unsettling is speculation as to what the purpose of such a map could be. Why and how did a society thousands of miles away come to compile such a detailed and comprehensive survey of my city? With perfect timing, Alexander Kent and John Davies' book on the subject, The Red Atlas, was published around then. It covers the history and form of the maps in great depth, yet is accessibly written, and I freely admit that a great deal of what I'll be explaining tonight is either derived or heavily informed by their work. And needless to say, I would instantly recommend the book to anyone wishing to learn more. I also have to stress that I am not an academic, and also that I have merely scratched the surface of what the Glasgow map tells us about our city, and the details of what was correctly recorded or otherwise. I cannot guarantee the accuracy of everything I'm about to relate to you, and I've certainly not pursued every anomaly or contradiction as far as they might be followed. I would be delighted if I can succeed in highlighting points of interest where others might be able to conduct more profound research. I would like now to provide a little background into how this remarkable map came into being. The Soviet mapping program is the largest cartographical exercise in history. It's still unclear how many maps were produced by this vast endeavour, but it's likely to be millions. The program, as we know it, was begun by Stalin during World War II as a world mapping program. And the thousands of individuals involved operated in secrecy for 50 years. That secrecy is still maintained, and pretty much anything we know about the program has to be deduced from the documents themselves. Its initial survey of the Soviet Union at a scale of 100,000, comprising more than 13,000 sheets, was completed by 1954. That fact alone should provide some impression of the scale of manpower allocated to the mapping effort. The actual purpose of this mammoth undertaking is probably actually many purposes, and I am in no way qualified to formulate an opinion on that matter. Whether intended in advance of worldwide socialism, military action, or whatever, I have no idea. Whatever, in the febrile and paranoid atmosphere of the Cold War, either side's reassurance would grow in proportion to the quantity of data they felt they held on their equivalent on the other side of the Iron Curtain. However, I will mention later a couple of instances in the Glasgow map and its accompanying text that send a shiver up the spine and hinting at the priorities of the hot war that the Cold War thankfully never became. Standard scales had been used since the time of Lenin, and maps were state-controlled since 1919. By the time the programme was at its peak, it had begun to produce maps which contain more information than any public mapping programme has. Mapping began of foreign towns and cities at 10,000 and 25,000 scales during World War II, along with the development of standard specifications and a comprehensive and standard symbology. More printing plates were added to the process in subsequent years, allowing more data. 10 colour separations were in use by the early 70s. From 1962, photographic data from Zenit satellites began to be incorporated. Access to the products of the Soviet mapping programme were tightly controlled. In fact, the existence and extent of the programme was withheld from many of its actual intended users. Map sheets, even for those trained in their use, had to be signed in and out from stock. And if damaged or destroyed, fragments had to be returned in lieu of the full sheet. The military maps were produced by the Military Topographic Directorate of the General Staff of the Soviet Army, and editions also confidential for civic use were produced from the 1970s onwards. Its related organisation, the Central Administration for Geodesy and Cartography, produced maps for public and tourist consumption. The bases for these were expanded from the tiny scale of 1/250,000 and featured random distortions and inaccuracies, introduced deliberately to reduce their utility. The state prize, in fact, was awarded by Stalin to the originator of this deliberately frustrating practice. These maps, when they cover Russian territory, remain protected by the state. And the prosecutions and imprisonment in 2010 of a Russian citizen and 2012 of an army officer for making such maps available to US agents show that this is not an empty threat. Thankfully, sufficient distance exists both geographically and in decades for us to be able to enjoy the fascinating details, exquisite clarity, and absorbing idiosyncrasies that these maps contain. I won't go into detail as regards the projections and grid systems involved with the mapping programme or the range of maps themselves. We are concerned here solely with one example from the military city plan series, usually executed at a scale of 1 to 25,000, which is a scale that those familiar with our own Ordnance Survey Explorer maps. So far, city plans of around 2,000 or so foreign cities have been discovered. About 100 of these represent towns and cities in the UK. More may yet surface, and it seems probable that more were mapped, since some have emerged of small, strategically unimportant locations, but yet we have no plans extant for Carlisle or Hull, for example. In Scotland, 6 areas are known to have been mapped. Glasgow and Paisley is joined by Aberdeen, Dundee, Dunfermline, Edinburgh, Greenock and Kilmarnock. So, to the origins of the maps themselves, 12 production facilities, or map factories, are known of, although the locations of only 10 have been confirmed. In some instances, the actual names, the individuals' names of the compilers and editors of the maps have been recorded on the sheets themselves. Interestingly, in the cases available, the majority of the compilers, though not the editors, were women. The maps used a considerable array of symbols and conventions uniformly applied across the globe, as well as the substantial training manuals used to educate staff to the most accurate and consistent deployment of this system. Some training posters have survived, and they are too beautiful not to show you. We can see, for example, a 1968 poster showing the correct use of items, a 1985 poster on railways and structures showing example illustrations of how they would look and compared to how they would appear on the map. 1968's highways and dirt roads. A gorgeous illustration showing comparing a perspective drawing of a location with its equivalent mapping. And one explaining the best representation of various water features. These compilers and editors based their work on a wide range of sources, and one big challenge is to work out exactly what forms of information have been demonstrated in the maps, and hence from which sources it has been derived. Obviously, in the Glasgow case, the accurate and publicly available Ordnance Survey maps and Admiralty charts would have been the primary source. But OS maps do not often indicate, for example, the product manufactured in a particular building, and certainly not the name of the company. Both are features which appear, although inconsistently in our case. It seems clear that post office directories, trades directories, tourist and transport guides will have been obtained, and their contents enriched the data that we can see in the maps. Some city plans, Liverpool for example, even contain information that could only have been sourced from German maps prepared ahead of Operation Sea Lion, the proposed invasion of the UK, and recovered, like so much vital material, by victorious forces following the fall of the Nazi regime. The manifold eras from which the data derives lead to an odd situation. Most maps in the world aspire to show a snapshot in time, but the Soviet maps self-evidently blend the years and in some cases decades. We will see some examples of this peculiarity when we begin to look at the Glasgow map itself, as we will see situations where the map makers definitely had access to source material unavailable to the general population of Glasgow at the time. And there remain some features of the Soviet maps which cannot be accounted for by any recorded source. I'm talking about those tantalizing situations where no other explanation can be made for its appearance but that of research carried out by an individual on the ground. Only one such instance has been identified on the Glasgow map, which I will point you towards, but more may yet wait to be discovered. Another hint of what might have been going on in the highly charged atmosphere of those decades of mystery and suspicion is related in Davies and Kent's book. During those times, many Soviet vessels visited our waters, and in the National Archives at Kew, they uncovered a great deal of correspondence detailing the British state's frustration at its inability to discover the purposes of these missions. A 1964 Ministry of Defence memo to the Foreign Office discussed the visit of 3 ships, the Polius, Tsuvov and Svor, to Glasgow. It appears that the Soviet naval attaché misinformed us when he said that the ships were fully commissioned warships. On the contrary, when the hydrographer of the Navy visited the ships in Glasgow, he was categorically told that they were not warships, but naval auxiliaries. This certainly seems to have been borne out by the fact that most of the people on board were civilian scientists. Attached to this document is a report by that Navy hydrographer, which one would imagine failed to fill his superiors with confidence. Due to the lack of an interpreter, I was unable to make any serious attempts to find out what the ship was doing. The report also mentions many glasses of vodka, and his observation that a number of echo-sounding machines were Kelvin Hughes, but I did not see a precision depth recorder. I was not given the opportunity to visit the other 2 ships which were lying in the same basin. Fittingly enough, as you may know, Kelvin Hughes, makers of the equipment mentioned on board, had its roots in Glasgow. Whether or not the fruits of the research of those civilian scientists is evident on the map we are looking at tonight will probably never be revealed, but it seems quite possible. The Soviet map program carried out its greatest volume of work from the 1960s to the 1990s. When the USSR began to transform and pull its territory inwards, sporadic clandestine exchanges began to occur with maps changing hands for dollars. Probably the greatest quantity of maps that has become available in the West results from one more public incident, however. In 1989, a Latvian map printer caught wind of the ongoing disposal by pulping of a large amount of printed material. This turned out to be the ordered destruction of the contents of one of the 25 USSR military map depots, 6,000 tons of maps. After securing the opportunity to remove 100 tons, he suffered the loss of all but 2 or 3 tons thanks to local kids setting fire to them in his yard. Of this remainder, many were merely training maps, but a sufficient quantity of important maps made it through such adventures for him to establish an international map shop. And it's from this stock that the map you see here has been obtained. So let's finally have a look at the map itself. The Glasgow Paisley military city plan comprises 2 separate sheets which have been placed side by side here and the meeting edges trimmed off. You will see straight away that roughly half of the eastern sheet is taken up by 3 areas of text. These are 3 elements that are common to most of the large-scale city plans. Though in some cases, London, for example, they are produced as an accompanying booklet. From the top, the 3 elements are the list of important objects, though the translation could be interpreted as facilities, subjects, or more ominously, objectives. Below that, a street index with grid references. And at the foot, a spravka, a short yet in-depth description of the relevant city, its urban character, industry, infrastructure, topography, strategic value, and even weather conditions. This last item in particular makes for fascinating reading. Coupled with the incredible level of depth and detail in the map itself, these elements form a consistent standard for describing an urban area. If I, with no previous knowledge of Glasgow, were to find myself beached by the Clyde, or dropped into a field in Lanarkshire, or debating strategy in a command room on the other side of the globe, I could have in my hand a very rapid way of familiarising myself with the city that I now had to evaluate or find my way in. Consider that this would be equally true of most of the cities of the world, and you can begin to grasp the scale of what the mapping programme achieved. We will look at the list of important objects and the spravka in some detail further on. But before that, we will look at the margins of the map. You will notice at its foot some standard features. At the bottom left of the western sheet, a very basic legend appears. The Soviet map symbology, as I'd mentioned, is huge, incorporating hundreds of symbols and applied consistently to millions of maps. The map maker's manual ran to 200 pages. But here we see only the very basic explanation. Pink for governmental and administrative facilities, green for military and communication structures, and black for industrial buildings. Urban density is represented by different shades of brown. At the centre bottom of both sheets is the specification for the map itself. In this case, reading 1 to 25,000, Glasgow, Paisley, brackets N-30-4, brackets 2 sheets, sheet number 2, secret 1981. And at the bottom of right of each sheet, we'll look at the eastern sheet here. We can see production information. In this case, the Cyrillic I indicating the map series, city plan. 8/2 is job number 8, sheet 2. Roman numeral 9-81 is the date of printing, September 81. And the Cyrillic L symbol after that indicates the source factory of the map, Leningrad. So we now know that it was in the city now restored to the name of St. Petersburg that the streets of Bearsden and Polmadie were studied and drawn out. The Glasgow map is unusual in that it boasts an inset plan of the subway. Underground railway systems may have been difficult to classify for the map makers, of course. London is the only other UK map to identify its underground railway system using metro system symbols and to feature a separate underground map, although it's in that case it was incorporated into the accompanying information booklet as a fold-out plan. It's worth noting that any Harry Beck-style simplification of the networks was disregarded. The Soviets liked their tube maps to be geographically accurate. The map incorporates the whole Glasgow conurbation, from Erskine in the west to Baillieston in the east, and from Mulgai in the north to the edge of East Kilbride in the south. Urban density, one of the factors that the Soviet mapping system is designed to portray, just as effectively as our own maps of the time, can be seen colouring the map in built-up areas. If we compare, for example, the villas of Pollokshields with the nearby tenements of Govan Hill, or the blocks of the city centre. One feature I could highlight there is the blue notches along the edge of the Clyde, which indicate the stone embanked nature of that stretch of the channel. We have parks. Pollock Park is seen here, always depicted with details of vegetation and foliage type. Of these colour-coded categories of structure, the green, which is military and communications objects, is the rarest on our map. I can only locate a handful of these, with some obvious inclusions such as Maryhill Barracks, the Admiralty oil tanks at Dalnotter and Old Kilpatrick at the western end of the Trans-Scotland pipeline from Grangemouth. 2 strategically important radio masts at Inchinnan. Cowglen Military Hospital. Various post offices and sorting offices. I can show you the central post offices at George Square and Baldwell Street here. And of course, the airport. The pink or governmental and administrative objects include both Glasgow University and Strathclyde University, as well as Jordan Hill Teacher Training College, which is simply described with the word Institute. Bank headquarters must have constituted a distinct strategic priority for the map makers, since quite a few are designated in this special way, along with 2 police stations. Finally, our dear city chambers is simply listed as City Court, object number 181. The 1 has been lost in the join between the maps there slightly. The black or industrial, sometimes military, colour coding is the feature that leaps out more than any other from the map. Bear in mind that much of the information used to compile this element of the map data seems often to be well out of date. But even so, and even from a distance, the volume of industrial landholding leaps out from the map sheets. One can easily pick out Hillington, Linwood, which we've mentioned, the yards of the Upper Clyde, the grouping of heavy industries in Springburn, and other major factories scattered around the city. We shall visit some of these sites when we look at the items which appear on the list of important objects. The road network is shown in great detail, infrastructure being one of the primary concerns of the map makers. No separate colour designation is made for motorways, but we can see that the M8, for example, is accurately depicted, unnumbered, in the state one would expect for the 1981 date of the map. The Bishopton Bypass Stage 2, which opened in 1975, is included. Stage 1, by the way, if you're interested, dealt with a connection to the new Erskine Bridge and was completed 4 or 5 years earlier. Stuart Baird of the superlative Glasgow Motorway Archive project cast his expert eye over the depiction of this junction on the left as we see it here, and tells me that it shows 2 slip roads which never actually existed but may have appeared on some plans of the time. His conclusion, along with mine, is that this case demonstrates that an amalgam of sources, OS and others, have been used. There are some subtleties as to how roads are portrayed by the Soviet mapping program, few of which I am familiar with, and none of which I'm going into today. What I can say is that the Glasgow map does not contain some of the annotations of detail that other maps feature by way of individual road dimensions, etc. Although the Spravka essay covers some of this detail. Perhaps this reflects the difficulty of obtaining such data in this area. There is a theory as to why the Soviet maps were so information heavy on road dimensions, surfacing, bridge load bearing construction, and river depths, riverbed composition, etc., and why such efforts are made to discover this data. This theory is related to the legacy of their World War II experience. In that conflict, the USSR's breakthroughs in military vehicle design were a significant factor in the repulsion of German forces, and the Soviet Union continued to be a world leader in tank design. By contrast, contemporary US military maps tend to be smaller scale and better suited to strategic and aerial considerations. So let's turn to those textual areas of the map. Firstly, the Spravka, 2,200 words that form a succinct description of the city and its territory. This is organised along a fairly standard template for such things and contains the headings which you may be able to pick out in capitals here. The headings: general information, surroundings of the city, the territory of the city, industrial and transport objects, and communal facilities, utilities, medical and sanitary infrastructure. The topics of the content, however, to my eye, seem to jump around quite a lot between the clear categorization that such headings would imply. Now, it's worth, I think, quoting a great deal of this in full, particularly the introductory general information paragraph, which I find brings home the slightly discomforting feeling of being watched and assessed by a foreign power, giving an impression of their priorities. And it includes at least one glaring and puzzling inaccuracy. General information. Glasgow is a city in the northwest of Great Britain, Scotland, and is the administrative centre of the region of Strathclyde. Together with its suburbs and satellite towns, Paisley, East Kilbride, Dumbarton, Coatbridge, Port Glasgow, Greenock and others, the city forms the Clydeside conurbation, which is a large industrial region. Glasgow is an important hub of railways and highways, a major seaport and airport. The city is located in the central Scottish lowlands, near a coalfield on the navigable River Clyde. 36 kilometres from the mouth of the Firth of Clyde, where it flows into the Atlantic Ocean. The shores of the estuary are the location of British naval bases Paisley and Rothsay, advanced nuclear submarine bases of the US Navy, Holyloch, large ammunition depots, including nuclear depots, and other important military facilities. The population of Glasgow itself is 1.1 million people, 1975. Clydeside, 1.7 million people, 1973. The area of Glasgow within its administrative borders is approximately 170 square kilometres. Clydeside, 400 square kilometres. A couple of points of interest here. Clydeside is obviously being used as a term for the urban area outside of and not including Glasgow itself. The figures for area and population seem to be fairly accurate if that assumption is made. And it's no surprise that Holyloch and Paisley top the priorities here. But the reference to Rothsay is a puzzle. Although Rothsay Bay was apparently the official base of the 3rd Submarine Squadron until 1957, and its depot ship HMS Adamant moored there, and even allowing for Butte's role in training and midget submarine testing during World War II, the inclusion of it here with equivalent importance to the base of the UK's nuclear deterrent seems utterly inexplicable. Yet, the phonetic translation of the name seems absolutely certain. It matches the naming of Rothsay Dock at Clyde Bank, for instance. What led to the charming Clyde Resort's promotion to strategically important naval base, I have no idea. The Spravka continues into a section describing the basic geography and infrastructure of the area with the usual bias of Soviet mapping towards the ease or otherwise of getting from A to B. The area around Glasgow is open, predominantly hilly. In western parts of the approaches to the city, gently undulating, and dissected by numerous small rivers and streams, which constitute the main obstacles for off-road vehicles. The hills have a height of 40 to 200 metres. Their tops are flat or rounded, and their slopes are shallow up to 10, sometimes covered with small forests. The peaks of the Grampian Mountains, absolute height 300 to 500 metres, are in the approaches to the city from the north or northwest. The reference to the Grampian Mountains rather than the Campsies appears to be a crude mistake. Possibly someone was referring to a very small map with a very basic designation of hills and mountains. Some information on the river follows. A major obstacle in the approaches to the city, as well as an important navigable route, is the River Clyde. Upstream of the city, its width is 40 to 80 metres and its depth is 1 to 1.5 metres. Within the city, the river is canalised with a width of 60 to 200 metres. Downstream of the city, the channel widens and forms an estuary with a width of up to 6 kilometres. The channel of the river has been deepened to 8.2 metres, 1963. The banks of the river are predominantly gently sloping, sand and shingle, and in the estuary are fringed with dry, sandy shoals. Within the city limits, the river banks are reinforced by stone walls. Lower parts of the Clyde are subject to tidal currents. If tides reach the city, the water level in the city will rise by 2.9 to 4.6 metres. We will return to this apparently insignificant tidal detail later. Crossing the Clyde are 5 railway bridges, 16 road bridges, 2 ferry crossings and 4 tunnels, including 2 metro lines. A navigable canal connects the Firth of Clyde and Glasgow with the Firth of Forth on the east coast of Great Britain. Its width is 19.2 metres at the top, 9.1 metres at the bottom, and its depth is 2.9 metres. The canal has 39 locks. The dimensions of each lock is 20.4 metres by 5.5 metres by 2.9 metres. 6 ferry crossings rather than the 2 mentioned are featured on the map. The 2 non-subway tunnels picked up here seem to be the Clyde tunnel, obviously, and the other presumably is the harbour tunnel between the 2 rotundas. And while we are marking the work of the anonymous workers of some 40 years ago, it's interesting to check those Forth Clyde Canal figures. The width given of 19.2 metres corresponds exactly with that given today as the maximum length of vessel that can fit the Firth Clyde locks, although that figure is given 20.4 metres here. And the depth of 2.9 metres seems somewhat optimistic given today's quoted depth of 1.83 metres. It has been suggested to me by John Davies, one of the Red Atlas book's authors, that mix-ups of feet and metres may have played a part in some of the dimensions given. Some of the rest of the data is spot on, however. In the vicinity of the city, the lowlands between the hills and mountain peaks are many small and shallow lakes and reservoirs. The rivers and canals are covered with thin ice only during the most severe winters, and only for a short time. The rivers are not seasonal. Their highest parts can be observed between November and February. During this period, the water level in parts of the river may rise by 2 to 5 metres. In the lower courses of the rivers, such water level rises may lead to flooding. Large parts of the territory around Glasgow are occupied by grain crops, in addition to vegetables and potatoes. Forests occupy small areas, mainly mixed pine birch or coniferous pine, low in height and sparsely distributed. In mountainous areas, heather is widespread, and many hedges are along roads and around fields. Now, this sounds very much like the west of Scotland to me. The attention to weather conditions here is striking and can appear superfluous until one remembers the extent of the mapping programme. A comparison with the same part of a Spravka for an area of Afghanistan or Brazil or Finland would be interesting. Also, note the succinct description of the agriculture of Lanarkshire and Renfrewshire. And then we're back to the infrastructure that seems of such prime importance to the users of the maps. A dense network of roads facilitates transport all year round. The motorways have 2 carriageways with cement concrete surfaces, each 5 to 8 metres wide. The width of the central reservation is 4.5 metres. The basis of the road network consists of improved highways, surfaced with asphalt, concrete and cement concrete. The width of the carriageways is 8 to 12 metres and the whole road 10 to 14 metres wide. Highways have asphalt surfaces or, less frequently, crushed stone or gravel surfaces. The width of their carriageways is 6 to 8 metres and the whole road is 8 to 10 metres wide. Improved dirt roads, as a rule, have blacked crushed stone gravel or slag surfaces. The width of these roadways is 3 to 6 metres. Bridges on the roads are metal, stone and reinforced concrete with a load carrying capacity of 60 to 80 tonnes. On certain bridges up to 150 to 180 tonnes. How this information on the load bearing of bridges came to be gathered is anyone's guess. But in my opinion, the most likely guess would be a simple extrapolation from what was known of the general situation around the UK. After a digression on the population, planning and industries of Glasgow's outlying towns, we are given what would seem to be a somewhat archaic picture of the hinterlands. Rural settlements are small, with few buildings, mostly farms consisting of 1 to 2 residential buildings and several outbuildings. Houses and villages are stone built with 1 to 2 stories and cellars. All settlements have an electricity supply and telephone connections. In cities, there is a water supply and sewage system. Rural water supplies come from wells. It would be difficult to say when mains water supplies arrived in the rural areas encompassed by the map, but there can't have been many drawing from wells, surely, by 1981. But for me, at least, it's difficult to not imagine this description informing potentially the plans of military strategy. The next section, however, is considerably more unsettling in its implications. Numerous operational and abandoned coal mines with a depth of up to 500 metres can be used as shelters, as can the basements of buildings, metro tunnels and railway tunnels. From the air, the city is recognisable by its position on the banks of the River Clyde, near its confluence into the Bay of the Firth of Clyde, and its large size. Good landmarks within the city are port facilities and shipyards. Next, we read the section that describes the form of the city itself. It's worth quoting this in full, I think, since it's here that we are given one of those arrestingly objective passages that make the experience of studying the map so instructive. It's particularly so for anyone interested in the present and historical urban fabric of Glasgow, seen through distant eyes. The territory of the city. The city of Glasgow, together with its suburbs, forms a continuous strip of urban development extending along the valley of the river. The Clyde and the adjacent hills extend more than 50 kilometres, with a width of 5 to 20 kilometres. It does not have a single planning system. The administrative and business centre of Glasgow is located on the right bank of the river, near the central passenger railway station, Object 174. Its layout is rectangular and the construction is solid. Streets are straight with a width of 15 to 20 metres. Houses are stone built and 2 to 8 stories high. There are separate high-rise buildings, 15 to 20 stories. Most of the main administrative and business establishments are concentrated here. For example, the City Hall, Central Post Office, Object 147, City Court, Object 181, banks, boards of industrial and insurance companies, stock exchanges, etc. The city centre is surrounded by a dense ring of residential areas, separated by river channels and numerous railway tracks. Often, industrial enterprises and entire industrial areas exist within these parts of the city. The layout of most areas is rectangular or near rectangular. Some areas have a radial or circular layout. The building is dense. Houses are stone built with 4 to 5 stories and cellars. There are separate high-rise buildings of 15 to 30 stories. Arterial roads are straight and wide, 35 to 40 metres. Other roads are much narrower, 15 to 20 metres. Junctions of arterial roads with secondary roads are sometimes arranged on multiple levels. The outskirts of Glasgow and its suburbs have a predominantly free layout. Houses are predominantly stone built with 2 to 8 stories and are often cottages. Most industrial enterprises are concentrated on the banks of the River Clyde and also around the railways that cross the city. Many old industries, sewing and printing, are located in the industrial or residential zone around the city centre. The city is well landscaped, with many parks and squares, and wood and shrub planted areas within residential blocks and along streets. Glasgow is a major scientific and cultural centre. Within the city there are 2 universities, Objects 183 and 184, a music academy, a large number of institutions and colleges for the training of specialists in various fields, such as technical colleges and scientific research institutions. The reference here to the City Hall would, one would think, mean the city chambers. It comes first in the small list and is capitalised. However, as previously seen, the city chambers do appear on the map, and that object is mentioned third on the list as the City Court, Object 181. The Spravka was apparently written after the map was compiled. This may be one of a few citations where it's possible the writer was attempting to deal with inaccuracies in the map without admitting that a blunder had been made. I'm also intrigued that it was felt necessary to mention that road junctions are sometimes arranged on multiple levels. Surely this wasn't an unusual situation for a sizable European city of the time, even one with Glasgow's complex relationship with the motorway system. The references to planning systems, free or otherwise, are a standard feature of Spravka texts, and this area seems to be a matter of some strategic interest. I also wonder how much evidence for the shrub-planted areas within residential blocks and along streets was available on the map sources available to the compilers. One would imagine working from the smallest scales of OS surveys. The penultimate section on industrial and transport objects is, as one might guess, very substantial. And like the object list, even the summary makes for depressing reading for anyone who mourns the passing of heavy industry on the Clyde. The leading industry of Clydeside is mechanical engineering and metalworking. Particular specialities are shipbuilding, 1/3 of British ships by tonnage, aviation, about 35% of the country's production of aircraft engines, heavy engineering, manufacture of steel structures, rolling mills, presses, mining equipment, electrical engineering industries, production of transformers, electric motors, cables, etc., railway engineering, production of locomotives and wagons, machine tools, instrument making, etc. At the shipyards of Glasgow, brackets Clydebank, Port Glasgow, Greenock and others, passenger ships, large tankers, dry and refrigerated cargo ships are built. The Yarrow, Object 11, and Scotstoun, Object 9 shipyards specialise in the construction of warships, patrol ships, destroyers, etc. In these same centres, as well as in Coatbridge, Motherwell and other towns, engines, turbines, boilers and other miscellaneous shipping equipment are produced. The aviation industry is represented by Rolls-Royce aircraft engine manufacturing plants. The company's largest plant is located in the industrial district of Hillington, Object 152. There are factories for the production of nuclear reactors, Motherwell, and automobile plants. Using both local and imported iron ore, ferrous metallurgy has received significant development. Smelting of pig iron and steel, especially steel sheets, and the manufacture of rolled products and pipes. In the city, there are 2 large-scale metalworks for the full production cycle, in Clyde Bridge and Motherwell, and up to 10 small, highly specialised works, specialising in steel making and rolling. Non-ferrous metallurgy is represented by small industries producing copper, copper alloys and rolled copper and lead products, in addition to nickel chrome alloys. There are also textile, cotton, jute, paper, printing and food, flour, tobacco industries. I will look at some specific industrial sites in the area when we consider the object list, but this summary of Glasgow's industrial capacity goes on in some considerable detail regarding the cargo turnover, dock statistics, crane loading capacities, total warehouse area and grain elevator volumes of the Clyde ports, as well as a summary of the rail passenger and goods system, and even the lengths and surfacing of the runways of Glasgow Airport. It's a reminder, once again, of the incredible degree of information contained in these 2 paper sheets. The Spravka concludes with some data on Glasgow's communal facilities, utilities, medical and sanitary infrastructure. For example, the city receives electricity from the Unified National Electricity System, which includes thermal power plants, objects 196 to 204, with a total capacity of approximately 1 million kilowatts, as well as the Hunterston nuclear plant with a capacity of 320,000 kilowatts, located 40 kilometres southwest of Glasgow on the shores of the Firth of Clyde Bay. We also learn of the gas supply and infrastructure, water supply, correctly identified as deriving from the use of surface water from reservoirs and lakes in the vicinity, mainly to the north of the city, telephone systems, and urban transport network. This last one includes a puzzle. The metro system has a length of 10.5 kilometres. The underground portion has a total length of 6.5 kilometres and lies at a depth of 45 metres. 10.5 kilometres for the subway is bang on. The rest of them, very complex. I'm not going to go into the details, but there's some mix-ups going on there. We're finally informed that the city has a powerful broadcasting station and a television centre. It has a developed network of medical institutions, including state hospitals, objects 13 to 16. We'll have a look at the object lists now. Here it is as it appears on the map and in a translation. Unlike the translation of the Spravka, this has been painstakingly compiled by myself, a non-Russian speaker, and logical conclusions where possible drawn from the more ambiguous phonetic spellings. It contains 204 objects deemed worth listing in the Glasgow and Paisley area. I'd mentioned that the object list conveys a real impression of the scale of manufacturing and heavy industry that Glasgow enjoyed at this time. But of course, as a list of facilities of interest to the Soviet military, it is skewed towards those related to infrastructure and industry. You will notice that the coverage of the facilities included in the list is by no means consistent. That's an indication, once more, of the inconsistent quality of the source material available. In the Soviet maps of the United States, industrial objects are frequently accompanied by the relevant company name and even the name of their products. But in the UK, such details are scarce. This may be a reflection of overseas intelligence focus. However, a few company names are significant or apparent enough to appear. Harland and Wolff, Fairfields, Yarrow, and John Brown's Engine Works, for example. But where such information was available, locations associated with such works are often given. These include the Lint House and Scotstoun Yards, the King George V Dock, Princes, Queens, and Rothsay Docks, and also some peculiar outliers like the Heathfield, number 82, and Gartcosh, number 81, refractory brickworks. Military production facilities, though few, are an understandable priority for the map makers. I already have explained the curious situation of the armour plate of Linwood. I was not previously aware that the Conqueror heavy tank was produced during the 1950s at Beardmore's in Clyde Bank, number 107. While it was officially the Royal Ordnance Factory Dalmuir, but I am familiar with that now. 9 power stations are listed, as well as 2 coal mines, 3 sawmills, 4 sewage treatment works, both universities, tanneries, pipeworks, paperworks, even the Hampden trolley bus garage, object number 140. Again, the knowledge available to this foreign power in the intimacy of its detail can be astonishing. The rail network, both passengers and goods, inevitably gets close attention. This leads us to an interesting anomaly, which looks like a howling mistake. Or is it? Glasgow's rail facilities are covered comprehensively, and many names appear. We see the obvious central mainline terminus stations. But beyond that, it's surprising to see stations like Westerton or Jordan Hill named on the list, as well as Sight Hill and Kinning Park goods depots. However, object number 1 on the map is Air Terminal. One might trust that this refers to the buildings at Glasgow Airport. So it's a surprise to see that on the map, object number 1 is St Enoch Station. Not the subway station, which does also appear on the map, but the mainline railway station, which was demolished in 1977. Furthermore, the description in the Spravka seems to have a blind spot to Sneating Station, mentioning only the other major terminals. It points out, the Glasgow Railway Hub includes a large number of stations. The largest of these is the Central Passenger Station, Object 174. The passenger station at Queen Street, 172. The passenger and freight terminal at High Street, 171. The freight and goods sorting depot at Sighthill, Object 164. The sorting site at Cowlairs, Object 176. And A Cargo Railway Station, Object 160. My personal theory, given the known chronological order of the document's creation, is that this was a mistake made on the map and willfully ignored in the subsequent writing of the Spravka. It has been suggested to me that the term could be translated as meaning terminal for travelling to the airport, and that bus services ran from St. Enoch Station to the airport. I would be glad to hear of anyone who knows that such services once ran, since this is such an apparently glaring error. I would like to conclude by looking at some of the other instances where the Soviet map makers appear to have got things wrong, where they seem to know more than we did, and where it seems surprising that they didn't. The obvious and perhaps most interesting items to check on such a map are government facilities that were officially secret at the time, yet we know enough about now to be able to confirm or deny their appearance on the map. Unfortunately, there happen to be very few of these within the area being considered. The Civil Defence Emergency Planning Centre at Clippin's House in Linwood is just outside the area in question, as is the Regional Control Centre at Torrance House in East Kilbride. So we do not know whether either of these Cold War installations would have otherwise been recorded in this map. It is slightly surprising, though, that Dial House at the top end of Waterloo Street does not feature in any way whatsoever. Dial House, we now know, was the Glasgow node of the Cold War resilient telephone network, and was designed, I think, with a 3-level basement fortified to the extent that it was presumed to be resilient in the event of a nuclear strike. Its role as a hub of communications tunnels under the city centre is now public knowledge, though the extent of such is still a matter of speculation and rumour. Whatever, it appears that secrecy was maintained, and this installation was not recognised behind the Iron Curtain, even as the important public communications centre that it was, let alone for its more confidential purpose. Another puzzle, I think, lies in the appearance and listing of Bishopton Royal Ordnance Factory. As you may know, Ordnance Survey maps and other maps omitted and still omit important military sites from their coverage, the so-called security deletions. Bishopton ROF was one of the biggest explosives factories in Europe and had been operating since during the Second World War, but its form only began to appear on OS maps in the early 1990s. Frustratingly, the bulk of the site runs off the western edge of our map, but we can see enough to be clear that the Soviets knew of its existence. However, from what I can discover, the few details that appear, which is, as you can see here, a railway station and some buildings, appear in a crude and inaccurate rendering. The station is marked in the green colour, indicative of a military or communications facility. Curiously, its description in the object list is 4 simple words: explosives and armament stockpiles. This seems to undersell a facility, which we can see by adding on the OS map of the time, that employed 20,000 people and would have been a major source of NATO armaments. It is arguable, given the basic description and minimal awareness of its scale and purpose, that USSR intelligence perhaps relied on information about its predecessor, the World War I Georgetown filling factory, which employed nearly half that amount and whose station buildings are possibly a better match for those on the map. There are plenty of other situations where errors seem to be made. I could mention the odd situation at Erskine, where the bridge and its predecessor, the Erskine ferry, coexist, something that was never the case. Or I could even point at the road arrangement around the Botanic Gardens, where a diversion through the gardens looks equally as good a highway as Queen Margaret Drive. And while we're in the area, I could point out that the Soviets had a small dash of black, i.e. functioning railway line exposed near the Botanic's entrance, as you can see. Yet the lines either side at Kirkley and Kelvin Grove are correctly shown to have been dismantled and their stations decommissioned. But I would like to think that I've provided enough of a glimpse in a cursory kind of way of the idiosyncrasies of this document that others may be sufficiently intrigued to take the research further. It is no longer difficult to get hold of this a copy of the map, digitally at least, and I would urge anyone wishing to embark on their own investigations certainly to start by purchasing a copy of Davies and Kent's book, The Red Atlas. My thanks here are due particularly to John Davies for his helpful correspondence on the subject, as well as Martin Davies at Canterbury University for his work on the Spravka, and to Zuli Milzada for her initial translations. Before I finish, I'll draw your attention to a feature of the annotation of the Clyde, which might be more interesting than it first seems. You will see a note below the Erskine Bridge, which translates as dredged to 8 meters, 1963, and 1 from it.
Hello, Lex. Can you hear me? You're breaking up a bit. Hello, sorry everybody. Something happened. Can you hear Lex at all? Or right? Oops. Right. Okay. Meanwhile, if you have any questions, you can put in the Q&A session at the box below. I think he's probably rejoining. Right. Apologies for the technical issues. Right. I hope it's not the Russian that's intervened. Right. Okay. Give me this. Just to let you know that he's trying to rejoin, so please bear with us for a second. Oh,
hey,
back. Hey,
I'm back. Okay.
still waiting for this. Are you sharing the screen or?
No, I'm not sharing screen.
Okay.
Although I'm called Thierry, but Over that. Are we still live?
Yes.
Right, good. Can I just conclude in that case?
Yeah.
I just wanted to finalise my point that this evidence might be evidence that those civilian scientists did in fact file a report from Glasgow on that occasion, and that the evidence has appeared in this map. But all I wanted to finish with was, like, if you can consider that work, the scale of it multiplied across the globe and supplemented by the vast effort involved in carrying out the greatest cartographic exercise known to man, you may be able to appreciate through this map also a snapshot of a city positively buzzing with industrial activity. Thank you.
Thank you, Lex. What a fascinating presentation. I hope everybody enjoyed as much as I did. If you have any question, you can type it at the Q&A box at the bottom. I think there are quite a lot of questions coming in. Apologies for the technical issue earlier. So Michelle kind of asks about where can we get the link to the Latvian map stock shop?
If you search for the, I think it's the Jana map shop. I think it's in Riga. I could certainly make a link for that available if you give me a second. Also, I can certainly make a link available to the Red Atlas website. I'm now plugging this book again, but they have digital paid downloads of a wide selection of the maps. So if you want to get your hands on an actual full-sized copy of the map, I didn't point out the dimensions of the map, but together you're talking about something maybe 1.5 meters by a meter. You can purchase a download of the map there and print it out. So that's your easiest way of getting hold of it. The originals, I'm not sure what's left. You will find them on eBay actually. The Jana map shop's got a. I'm just going to check their address, but they've got an eBay shop.
I think somebody found it.
Oh, has somebody found it? Good.
Yeah, if you go to it's www.karsuveikals.lv. So yeah.
And they're still turning up all the time. So if your city isn't covered, then you might.
Yeah.
Oh, there's a note there from somebody who grew up in Riga. That's interesting.
Yeah. I think a lot of people are kind of curious about how did they get that information?
Yeah, well, that's something I've been trying to deal with, and it's one of the most fascinating stories about this. Is it's such a mishmash. As I said, most maps exist as a snapshot saying at this moment in time, this territory looks like this. Is actually because it's coming from so many different sources, which have been compiled at different times. It's a weird multi-period map of the city. But yes, the sources would have been, I mean, the public sources, obviously, OS maps, Admiralty charts, trades directories, post office directories, even tourist guides. And people conducting research into these, the biggest part of the research is working out where did this fact come from, and what can you track this back to, and in certain cases that piece of information, like the stuff that has come from the Liverpool materials, which could only have come from the Wehrmacht preparations for invading the UK. There's only one place that information existed. So all different sources, I think, it just pulled together all data from many places. It would be very interesting to carry out more comparison with maps of cities elsewhere in other continents, and work out where the sources for that information were.
Definitely. Right. Let's see, any more questions coming through. Hi, Lex. So thanks for putting this together. I wonder if the error on the city chamber might be down to misinterpreting the city hall fruit market to most Glaswegian as a city hall.
Ah, yeah, I know. I'd wondered about the City Hall thing. I think that might well be the case. I think they've got a reference to City Hall, and they've got references to city chambers, and they may well put those all in as City Court, and that's the building that they marked on George Square. But yeah, it did occur to me that city halls, as in, you know,
Yes.
Merchant City halls, might have had a bearing on that. It's a case for research. It really is.
Yeah, definitely.
I wish somebody had an answer on the Rothsay. Why is Rothsay the most important? You know, super important strategic naval base. That's another complete mystery.
Yeah, the US base as Dunoon.
Yes, somebody's saying, why? Any idea why they mapped Kilmarnock? Is there something wrong with Kilmarnock? It shouldn't be mapped. What's the problem with Kilmarnock? Didn't deserve it. If you think it's not significant enough, there are particular in England, and I can't remember off the top of my head, but there's some really quite small towns in England that are mapped. Whereas we've just got those 6 that have been discovered in Scotland. Maybe other smaller towns were mapped in Scotland, and the maps just haven't come to light yet.
Right. Kind of trying to be aware at the time. What was the last story? Oh, that's the one before you broke off. Your internet cut off.
Oh, the last story. Yeah, well, really, it was just to cut it short. It was just those 2 bits of depth information, which sounds really trivial, on the River Clyde, just above and below the Erskine Bridge. It seems quite easy to trace this back to a particular edition of an Admiralty chart, apart from one bit of depth data that does not appear anywhere. And it's got basically the same date as those guys were being investigated in you know, for what on earth they were up to in the docks in Glasgow at the time. And it's really tempting to think that one of those people with their depth recorder, you know, that was the visit that produced some data that actually ended up on the map. As I'd mentioned, the most interesting, and back to sources again, the most interesting data you can find there is stuff that does not appear, it doesn't appear to have any public source.
Yeah.
Because there must have been people walking about here, you know, looking at things, recording things, and sending information back. And it's a fascinating thought.
Right, okay. I think we kind of covered most of the questions, I guess. Any more that you want to pick on?
I should have a look myself, actually.
there's another one. How do I pronounce that?
Is the former US base at Dunoon mentioned on the map? Yeah, if you're talking about the Holy Loch, yeah, then yes, it is. I grew up on the other side of the river looking at Holy Loch and always thinking that we were going to get the 3-minute warning. Yes, it's listed as one of the main, right at the top of the Spravka, just obviously of strategic importance. Did the Luftwaffe have maps of Glasgow? I don't know about maps, but yeah, there's not a great coverage, but there's 4 or 5 very easy to get hold of Luftwaffe aerial photographs of Glasgow. I don't know, they might not be something that the Soviets would have been interested in at the time, because by that time they had satellites up and running and could get far better imagery. Might the author have confused Rothsay with Rosyth? Yes, I've had this discussion a few times.
Quite close.
Yeah,
in a way.
I know, that was my first thought. I thought Rosyth, it's on the other side of the country, but if they confuse Rothsay with Rosyth, then why is this exactly the same spelling used for Rothsay Dock? You know, and why is it on the wrong side of the country? It's possible. It's the nearest to any kind of explanation that I've ever heard. It's just that phonetic similarity between Rothesay and Rosyth.
Great.
Could you mention your organisation again? I think that's probably your job, Thierry.
Oh yeah. So we are we are a New Glasgow Society. It's been established since 1965. So at the moment we have like we run 2 galleries, one in the West End near like Finniston, and the other one is in the High Street. So you can check out on you can Google us and find it on Twitter, Instagram, Facebook, and our website as well. So if you're more than welcome to join it. The membership is free. You just subscribe to the mailing list at the moment, and then yeah, and then you can hear more from us. And there's also tomorrow there's another event, webinars about the 1988 Glasgow Garden Festival. So yeah, feel free to join. Okay, next one for you.
Yes. Okay, I think that's probably us then.
Yeah. Ooh.
Well, thank you
Apologies
again.
Oh, sorry.
Yeah.
No, thank you for
Yes.
presenting all the research that you have done, and I think it's amazing. I mean, this is
Yeah,
probably
well,
the
as I
second
said,
time I listened to it, but I'm still like, oh,
I'm
I
glad
really loved it.
Great. I'm glad you enjoyed it. I hope everybody else out there enjoyed it, and particularly I hope people take this research further. Whatever area you're in, it's such an incredible achievement, that whole program of map making, and there's so much depth in what can be discovered there. So I would love to see somebody taking that further and finding out what conclusions they can draw. But thank you very much, everybody. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks very much to NGS for hosting me.
Thank you.
And I will say good night.
Yeah, good night. Have a good evening, everybody.
Evening.
Bye.